Hello students, this video is for B.Ed second year students. We are doing paper titled Creating an Inclusive School. In this class, we are going to begin by studying the difference between special education, integrated education and inclusive education. Let me begin by reminding you of the meaning of these three kinds of education. Special education is especially designed instruction to meet the unique needs and abilities of exceptional students. While integrated education means disabled children with learning difficulties attend mainstream school. And inclusive education refers to schools, colleges, and other educational institutes that are open to all children, including mentally retarded children, backward children, delinquent children, gifted children, slow learners, and underachievers. Remember that in integrated education, the child has little or no contact with his or her non-disabled peers, which is the difference as it differs from inclusive education. In terms of scope, the scope of special education is not very broad, same as integrated education, but here both of these differ with inclusive education because the scope of inclusive education is much broader and wider as compared to the two. In terms of the cost, the first one, which is special education, is expensive, while integrated education is not much expensive as there is no formal planning required. And the first one was expensive because a proper planning is required. And inclusive education, though it has a lot of merits, but it is very expensive because a proper formal planning is required. Lastly, in terms of facilities, in special education, special infrastructure provision is required. In integrated education, no such thing is required. And lastly, in inclusive education, special infrastructure like trained staff and special curriculum is designed, and so all this is required. Now let's move on to the next topic, which is problems of inclusive education, particular in India. Number one is skills of teachers. Teachers who are not trained or who are unwilling or unenthusiastic about working with differently abled students because of stigma. This is a great drawback of successful inclusion in terms of education. Second is attitude. Old attitudes die hard, and many still resist the accommodation of students with disabilities. So the challenges of inclusive education might be blamed on students' challenges instead of the shortcomings of the educational system. Thirdly, physical barriers. In some districts, students with physical disabilities are expected to attend schools that are inaccessible to them. Then fourthly, curriculum. A rigid curriculum that does not allow for experimentation or the use of different teaching methods can be an enormous barrier to inclusion. Similarly, language and communication, they're again a barrier. And then there are also socio-economic factors like areas that are traditionally poor and those with higher than average unemployment rates tend to have schools that reflect that environment, such as rundown facilities, students who are unable to afford basic necessities, and other barriers that lead to lack in this learning process. Violence, poor health services, and other social factors also create barriers. Then there's another point of funding. So adequate funding is definitely necessary for inclusion, and yet it is very rare. And due to lack of such facilities, qualified and properly trained teachers are not available. Educational material and general support is also unavailable. Organization of the education system is again one of the problems with inclusive education in India. Lastly, policies as barriers. Many policymakers do not understand or just simply believe in inclusive education, and these leaders can stonewall efforts to make school policies more inclusive. This can exclude whole group of learners from the mainstream educational system, thereby preventing them from enjoying the same opportunities for children in terms of education and employment afforded to traditional students. But let's not stop right here and let us discuss some ways of supporting inclusive education in India. Since you are going to be the future of the nation, you're going to build the future of the nation, thus, here are some ways you can help. Let us learn these. Number one is to promote positive attitudes. In all societies, there's a need to raise awareness that each child is unique and different. And with such an ideology, we can create a positive attitude. Secondly, promoting inclusive learning environment, which we have already discussed in the last video lecture as well. And next is promoting early intervention, which is again very important. So, appropriate early intervention will have a much greater impact and be more cost effective as well than prolonged interventions later in life. Another thing that can be considered is to promote positive role models. Many disabled children grow up never having met a disabled adult who is successful in life, so they do not understand what is like growing up for them. And disabled children may grow up more isolated than other children because of the same. Also, support can be given to them due by the help of policy development, a positive policy development, of course. It is rare that any effort is made to include disabled children in developing policies relevant to their needs. This needs to be looked upon, and we can also get some inspiration from Central and Eastern European models. Next, by supporting change of education, change of system in education, and developing an inclusive society. We can also seek government support. From last so many years, government has specifically focused on education system of our country. We have policies like Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan and so many other policies which also focus on mobilizing the resources, which can be another point. So, since India is a very resourceful country, we have many resources available, and varying from teaching, learning aids, teachers, institutes, books, classrooms, and everything else needs to be mobilized and channeled in a way that it gives maximum benefits. Next, collaboration with parents, community, leaders, teachers, NGOs can help in bringing a much larger and faster paced change. Next, proper classroom management. Tasks should be given in a sequential steps. Teachers should provide as many actual demonstration as possible in specific skills areas. Activities must be carried out in naturally occurring sequences and time frame. Use of multi-sensory approach can be used, and then reinforcement and great deal of patience would be required to teach a simple task. So do not humiliate a child ever under any circumstance. He will not learn if he is frightened. Lastly, use proper language and communication. Language should not remain a barrier between teachers and students, between the teaching learning process. Overcoming this barrier becomes necessary in the inclusive system of education. And we need to understand that for a transition from segregation to inclusion, various challenges are there and various things needs to be done. For example, superstition needs to be removed and segregation needs to be completely done with. And a movement towards integrated education should be there. And this has also already been aided by the Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975. And lastly, the principle of inclusion should be kept in mind in each and every process of building an inclusive education. Just keep in mind all the principles of inclusive education, which is teaching all students, exploring multiple identities, preventing prejudice, promoting social justice, choosing appropriate materials, teaching and learning about cultures and religions, and lastly, adapting and integrating lessons appropriately. In the last section of this video lecture, let's discuss the three major models of inclusion. Number one is partial inclusion model, or the also called as push-in model. In this, disabled students attend the regular classes with their normal peers. They also receive education in special classes. They attend special schools meant for their specific special education. In the second model, which is the full inclusion model, students with moderate to severe disabilities are included in the regular education classroom, and supports and aids are given to the regular education teacher to assist the special education student in the classroom. The principle of least restrictive environment is accommodated here, and other forms of inclusion are less extreme but provide opportunities for students with special education needs to learn within mainstream settings when appropriate. The last model is Wang's adaptive learning environment model. In this, an innovative education program designed to meet the diverse social and academic needs of students in regular classes is there. Underlying the model's design is the premise that students learn in different ways and at varying rates and require different amounts of instructional support. This model accommodates and builds upon these differences through adaptive instruction, in which a variety of instructional methods are adopted. The working of the model is as follows. The goal is to ensure achievement of basic academic skills and other valued educational outcomes, including positive self-perception, etc. Accordingly, it is supported by three categories of program design dimensions. Number one, delivery of adaptive instruction in regular classroom settings. Second, classroom management and program implementation. And thirdly, school and district level interventions. Effective implementation requires teachers to use all forms of knowledge in implementation. Although adaptive instruction calls for individualized planning, teachers do not work with students on one-on-one basis. Lastly, but very importantly, individual differences are viewed as the norm rather than an exception. While differences in rates of progress are recognized by teachers, parents, and the students themselves, the acquisition of basic academic skills and development of social competence and self-esteem are expected of each student. Under this model, specialists, teachers, and other related services professionals work with regular classroom teachers in a coordinated system of instructional and related service delivery. If you have any doubts, you are very welcome. In the next video lecture, we will study Unit 2, that is Legal and Policy Perspectives, in detail.